Our story takes us back to the 9th century, to an age when the Norse people ruled the northern seas. Picture yourself standing on the rugged shores of Scandinavia, where Denmark and Norway's ancient coastlines carved deep into the landscape, creating mysterious fjords shrouded in mist and legend. The Viking Age was at its magnificent peak, a time when these master seafarers were expanding their influence across Europe. From their homeland in Scandinavia, they launched countless expeditions, some for trade, others for conquest, reaching as far as the Mediterranean, the British Isles, and even the distant shores of North America. Imagine walking through a Viking settlement. The air is thick with the salty breeze from the sea, mingling with the sharp scent of burning wood from the longships under construction. In the distance, you hear the rhythmic clanging of hammers on anvils as blacksmiths forge weapons and shields. The sound echoes across the settlement, mixing with the calls of seabirds and the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore. As night falls, life moves into the great mead halls, where flickering torchlight casts dancing shadows on wooden walls. These halls were more than just places to feast and drink. They were the heart of Viking society, where stories were shared, alliances were forged, and heroes were celebrated. The people themselves were as hardy as the land they inhabited. Men and women alike wore thick woolen tunics, often layered with animal furs, to ward off the bitter Nordic cold. Warriors donned leather and metal armor, carrying shields painted with bold designs that struck fear into their enemies' hearts. What makes this period particularly fascinating is how the Vikings managed to build such a complex society in this challenging environment. They weren't just raiders, they were skilled craftsmen, traders, explorers, and storytellers. Their ships were engineering marvels of their time, enabling them to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers with remarkable precision. And it was in this world, this age of sagas and sword songs, that our story's heroine, Lagertha, would make her mark on history. But before we delve into her remarkable tale, if you're as fascinated by Viking culture as we are and want to discover the story of one of the most impressive warriors who ever lived, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Medieval Archives. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next in this historical adventure. If you are fascinated by Viking culture and want to discover the story of one of the most impressive warriors who ever lived, leave your like now and subscribe to the Medieval Archives so you don't miss any historical adventure. Let me introduce you to the remarkable characters who shaped this epic Viking saga. At the heart of our story stands Lagertha, a legendary Shieldmaiden whose tale has echoed through the centuries. More than just a warrior, Lagertha was known for her tactical mind, unwavering leadership, and a fighting spirit that earned her respect in a world dominated by male warriors. Picture a woman who could command both a battlefield and a great hall with equal grace. That was Lagertha. The sagas tell us she was as beautiful as she was deadly, with long flowing hair that shone like gold in the northern sun, and eyes that could pierce through any deception. But make no mistake, beneath this beauty lay the heart of a fierce warrior who could outfight the strongest men of her time. Then there's Ragnar Lothbrok, whose name still sends shivers down the spine of anyone who knows Viking history. A legendary leader whose ambition and cunning matched his battlefield prowess, Ragnar became Lagertha's first husband. Their marriage wasn't just a union of hearts, but a partnership of two extraordinary warriors who would lead their people to glory. Behind Lagertha's rise to prominence stands her father, Earl Siward. According to the sagas, he was a powerful nobleman who helped shape Lagertha's early years, though much of his story remains shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that he must have been exceptional himself to have raised such a remarkable daughter in an age when most women were expected to stay far from the battlefield. The story takes an interesting turn with the arrival of Aslaug, a woman whose beauty was said to be matched only by her wisdom. As Ragnar's second wife, she became Lagertha's rival, though not in the way you might expect. Their relationship represents one of the most complex dynamics in Viking sagas. Two powerful women, each extraordinary in her own right, whose destinies became intertwined through one man. Finally, we have Bjorn Ironside, the son of Lagertha and Ragnar. Named Ironside for his seemingly invincible nature in battle, Bjorn would grow to become one of the most famous Vikings in history. Through him, we see the perfect blend of his parents' qualities, his father's ambition and his mother's tactical brilliance. What makes these characters particularly fascinating is how their lives interweaved to create a tapestry of power, loyalty, betrayal, and honor. The sagas tell us that despite their eventual separation, Lagertha and Ragnar's paths would cross many times throughout their lives, sometimes as allies, sometimes as adversaries, but always with the respect that great warriors hold for one another. These weren't just characters in a story, they were real people whose actions and decisions shaped the course of Viking history. While some details may have been embellished over time, archaeological evidence continues to support many aspects of their saga, including the existence of female warriors in Viking society who held positions of power and respect, just as Lagertha did. Their story reminds us that in the world of the Vikings, greatness wasn't determined by gender, but by courage, wisdom, and strength of character. Each of these figures left an indelible mark on history, their tales preserved not just in the ancient sagas, but in the very fabric of Norse culture and tradition. At the heart of Lagertha's story lies a tapestry of themes and conflicts that resonate even today. Let me paint you a picture of what it meant to be a woman warrior in the Viking Age, where the clash of swords was as common as the crash of waves against longship hulls. Imagine a world where women were expected to tend to homes and families, yet some dared to break these bonds. Lagertha wasn't just breaking them, she was shattering them with her shield and sword. In a society where power typically flowed through male bloodlines, she carved her own path, earning respect not through birthright, but through the strength of her arm and the wisdom of her leadership. What's particularly fascinating is how she balanced seemingly contradictory roles. Picture a leader who could command fierce warriors in battle, then return to make crucial diplomatic decisions for her people. The sagas tell us that Lagertha's greatest strength wasn't just her skill with weapons, but her ability to understand when to use force and when to employ diplomacy. This brings us to one of the most compelling aspects of her story: the constant tension between loyalty and personal ambition. Think about it. Here was a woman who loved Ragnar Lothbrok deeply, yet refused to diminish herself for that love. When faced with the choice between remaining in Ragnar's shadow or ruling in her own right, she chose independence. The sagas suggest this decision wasn't made lightly. It came with personal cost, but also great reward. Now let's talk about the conflicts that shaped her legend. In the male-dominated world of Viking society, Lagertha faced constant challenges to her authority. Archaeological evidence from Viking settlements has revealed something remarkable. Some of the most impressive warrior burials were actually those of women, suggesting Lagertha wasn't alone in her fight for recognition. The struggle between heart and duty plays out like a complex chess game in her story. Even after separating from Ragnar, their paths continued to cross in ways that tested both their former love and their current allegiances. This wasn't just a personal drama. It had real consequences for their people and territories. Perhaps the most intense conflicts came from protecting what she had built. Territory and power in Viking society weren't just about land and wealth. They were about securing a future for your people. Lagertha had to defend her holdings not just against external threats, but sometimes against those she once called allies. The Viking concept of honor adds another layer to these conflicts. This wasn't simply about personal glory, it was about living up to the ideals of a society that valued strength, wisdom, and courage above all else. The sagas tell us that Lagertha's honor was never in question, even among her rivals. She fought with integrity and led with wisdom, earning the kind of respect that transcended gender boundaries. What makes her story so compelling is how these conflicts weren't just external battles. They were internal struggles that any leader, regardless of time or place, might face. How do you balance personal happiness with duty? When do you choose love over power, or power over love? These questions weren't unique to Lagertha, but her answers to them were revolutionary for her time. The legacy of these conflicts and themes continues to captivate us today. In Lagertha's story, we see a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world. She thrived in it, changing it through her actions and decisions. She proved that true power comes not from physical strength alone, but from the wisdom to know how to use it, and the courage to stand firm in one's convictions. Through all these conflicts and challenges, Lagertha emerged not just as a survivor, but as a legend, a Shieldmaiden whose story would be told and retold for generations, inspiring others to break their own boundaries and forge their own paths, regardless of the obstacles before them. Let's step back in time and explore daily life in Viking society. You might be surprised by how different it was from what you've seen in movies and TV shows. Contrary to popular belief, Viking women held significant power in their society. While men were often away on raids or trading expeditions, women ran the households. But this wasn't just about cooking and cleaning. They held the keys to the longhouse, managed the family's wealth, and made important decisions that affected the entire community. They could own property, inherit wealth, and even divorce their husbands if they weren't treated properly. Rights that women in many other medieval societies wouldn't enjoy for centuries to come. Now let's talk about one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking society, the Shieldmaidens. These warrior women weren't just figures of legend. Archaeological discoveries have turned our understanding of Viking gender roles upside down. In 2017, researchers confirmed that one of the most impressive Viking warrior burials ever found, complete with weapons and war horses, belonged to a woman. This discovery sent shockwaves through the academic community and validated what the sagas had been telling us all along. Women like Lagertha really did fight alongside men in battle. The power structure in Norse settlements was remarkably complex. Think of it as a web rather than a pyramid. At its center were the jarls or earls, local chieftains who earned their position through a combination of wealth, military prowess, and political skill. Below them were the carls, free men and women who made up the bulk of society, and then the thralls, or slaves. But here's what's interesting. Social mobility was possible. A thrall could buy their freedom, and a successful carl could rise to become a jarl. Marriage in Viking society wasn't just about love, it was about politics and power. Alliances through marriage could prevent wars, seal peace treaties, or unite powerful families. However, Viking women had a say in their marriages, and divorce was an accepted practice. A woman could divorce her husband for something as serious as violence or as personal as wearing an unmanly shirt. Life in the great halls was where all these social elements came together. Picture this, a massive wooden structure, its walls lined with shields, smoke rising from the central hearth to escape through holes in the roof. These halls weren't just places to eat and sleep, they were the heart of Viking political and social life. Here, alliances were forged, stories were shared, and important decisions were made. The seating arrangements alone could tell you everything about a person's status in society. The military organization was equally sophisticated. Vikings didn't just charge into battle randomly. They used complex tactics and formations. The shield wall, where warriors would lock their shields together to create an almost impenetrable barrier, required intense training and discipline. Warriors would train together regularly, forming tight-knit units bound by loyalty and trust. Some of the most remarkable aspects of Viking society were their legal assemblies called things. These were public gatherings where disputes were settled, laws were made, and justice was administered. Women could participate in these assemblies, speaking up for their rights and interests. In fact, Archaeological evidence suggests that some women held positions of legal authority. The Vikings also had a sophisticated system of compensation for crimes and injuries. Rather than simple punishment, they used a complex system of fines and payments to maintain social order. This helped prevent blood feuds and kept society stable, most of the time anyway. This was the world Lagertha inhabited, a society that, while certainly not perfect, offered opportunities for women to wield real power and influence. Whether through political marriage, skilled trading, or prowess in battle, women like Lagertha could rise to positions of significant authority and respect. The social structure of Viking society helps us understand how someone like Lagertha could rise to such prominence. It wasn't just her individual strength and skill. She operated within a system that, while challenging, didn't completely bar women from power. Her story reminds us that history is often more complex and nuanced than we imagine. Fascinating, isn't it? Tell us in the comments what surprised you most about Viking society and Lagertha's story so far. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Medieval Archives to journey deeper into history with us. Now let me tell you about the defining moments that shaped Lagertha's legendary status. Moments that would be immortalized in the sagas and whispered around countless fireside tales. The story of Lagertha and Ragnar's first meeting reads like something from an epic tale. According to Saxo Grammaticus, who wrote about these events in the 12th century, Ragnar encountered Lagertha during a battle in Norway. But here's where it gets interesting. She wasn't a damsel in distress. Instead, she was fighting alongside other shield maidens, her hair flowing freely as she demonstrated combat skills that left even seasoned warriors in awe. Legend has it that Ragnar couldn't take his eyes off this warrior woman who fought with the grace of a Valkyrie and the ferocity of a wolf. Their marriage marked the beginning of a powerful partnership. Together, they became an unstoppable force in the Nordic world. Think of them as the power couple of their time. While Ragnar led raids and expanded their territory, Lagertha proved herself not just as a warrior, but as a skilled diplomat and leader. Archaeological evidence from this period shows that Viking settlements were often co-led by powerful couples, suggesting that such partnerships were more common than previously thought. But perhaps the most dramatic turning point came with their separation. When Ragnar took a second wife, Lagertha made a decision that would define her legacy. She chose independence over submission. This wasn't just a personal choice, it was a political statement. She established her own territory and became an earl in her own right, something almost unheard of for a woman of her time. Recent archaeological discoveries have shown that some Viking settlements were indeed ruled by women, lending credibility to this part of her story. The sagas tell us of numerous battles where Lagertha's tactical genius shone through. In one particularly famous incident, she came to Ragnar's aid when he was under attack, proving that former lovers could be valuable allies in the complex world of Viking politics. She led a fleet of 120 ships. And here's a fascinating detail. Ship burials discovered by archaeologists have shown that women did indeed command Viking vessels, with female-owned ships being identified through distinct burial markers. Did you know that the very word Viking originally meant to go on an expedition? It was a verb before it became a noun, and Lagertha certainly lived up to both meanings. Her expeditions and conquests expanded her influence across the Norse world. Archaeological evidence from this period shows extensive trade networks and military campaigns led by Norse leaders, and Lagertha would have been part of this dynamic environment. The defense of her territories showcased another side of her leadership. She faced challenges from rival earls and foreign invaders, but she met these threats with a combination of military might and clever diplomacy. The sagas describe how she used both conventional warfare and cunning strategies to protect her people. One particularly clever tactic involved releasing her war dogs on unsuspecting attackers, a strategy that archaeological evidence suggests was actually used in Viking warfare. Here's something remarkable. Archaeologists have discovered Viking warrior graves containing women buried with full military honors, complete with weapons, armor, and even horses. These findings validate the saga accounts of shield maidens like Lagertha. Even more fascinating is that shield maidens weren't just mentioned in Norse sagas. They appear in the historical records of other cultures who encountered the Vikings, from Anglo-Saxon chronicles to Arabic travel accounts. Throughout her life, Lagertha faced numerous challenges to her authority, but each time she emerged stronger. She proved that leadership wasn't about gender, it was about ability, courage, and wisdom. The sagas tell us that even in her later years, she continued to command respect and wield significant influence in Norse society. What's particularly interesting about these turning points in Lagertha's life is how they mirror patterns we see in archaeological evidence from the Viking Age. Recent discoveries have shown that women played far more diverse and powerful roles in Viking society than previously thought. From grave goods showing female warriors to runestones commemorating women leaders, the physical evidence increasingly supports the kind of life that Lagertha is described as living. Her story reminds us that history isn't always what we expect it to be. In an age we often think of as brutally male-dominated, here was a woman who carved out her own path, commanded respect, and left a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Through each twist and turn of her story, Lagertha demonstrated that true power comes not from gender or birth, but from courage, wisdom, and the strength to forge one's own destiny. Let's dive into the rich cultural tapestry that shaped Lagertha's world, a fascinating blend of mythology, warrior traditions, and ancient wisdom that continues to captivate us today. At the heart of Viking culture lay their complex belief system, where the lines between the mythological and the real often blurred. The Valkyries, those magnificent choosers of the slain, held a special place in Norse mythology. These powerful female figures weren't just spiritual beings, they served as inspiration for shield maidens like Lagertha. Imagine warriors looking to the sky during battle, believing these divine women on winged horses might be watching, deciding who would join the ranks of Odin's chosen warriors in Valhalla. The warrior traditions of the Vikings were far more sophisticated than most people realize. While we often picture berserkers in frenzied attacks, the reality was far more nuanced. Warriors underwent years of training, learning not just how to swing a sword, but how to move in formation, understand battle tactics, and master various weapons. Archaeological finds have revealed training grounds where young warriors would practice with wooden weapons before earning the right to bear steel. What's particularly fascinating is how these traditions were preserved through the art of storytelling. The sagas weren't just entertainment. They were the lifeblood of Viking cultural memory. Imagine yourself in a great hall, the fire casting dancing shadows on wooden walls, as a skilled storyteller weaves tales of great deeds and heroic battles. These oral histories were so precise that when modern archaeologists discover new sites, they often find that the saga descriptions match the physical evidence perfectly. Viking ceremonies and rituals marked every significant moment in life. Take the naming ceremony, for instance, a 9-day celebration where a child would receive not just a name, but their place in society. Or the fascinating burial rituals where great warriors might be laid to rest in their ships, surrounded by their weapons, treasures, and sometimes even their horses. Recent archaeological discoveries have shown that these ceremonies were incredibly complex, with evidence of feasting that lasted days and ritualistic arrangements of objects that held deep symbolic meaning. The Norse artistic tradition was equally rich and meaningful. Every curve and line in their intricate knotwork patterns told a story. The famous Viking art styles, from the elegant Oseberg to the complex Ernest style, weren't just decorative. They were a sophisticated visual language that communicated stories of gods, heroes, and great deeds. The symbols they used, Thor's hammer, Odin's ravens, the world tree Yggdrasil, weren't just pretty designs, they were powerful statements of belief and identity. One of the most interesting aspects of Viking culture was their understanding of fate, or word. Unlike the rigid destiny of some cultures, the Norse viewed fate as a complex weaving of choices and predetermined events. This belief system helped shape leaders like Lagertha, who understood that while fate might set the stage, personal choice and courage determined how the story would unfold. The Vikings also had a complex legal system, governed by thing meetings, where laws were recited from memory and disputes were settled. These gatherings were more than just legal proceedings. They were social events where news was shared, alliances were formed, and marriages were arranged. Archaeological evidence has revealed special meeting places marked by stone circles or specially constructed buildings where these important gatherings took place. Their intellectual tradition included a sophisticated understanding of navigation, astronomy, and mathematics. The Vikings could navigate across open seas using sunstones, the positions of stars, and their deep understanding of natural patterns. They developed complex calendar systems and could predict seasonal changes with remarkable accuracy, crucial skills for both farming and raiding. The role of women in intellectual and spiritual life was particularly noteworthy. Women were often the keepers of medical knowledge, passing down healing traditions through generations. They were also associated with saga, a form of Norse magic that even Odin himself was said to have learned from the goddess Freya. Archaeological evidence has revealed women's graves containing religious and magical artifacts, suggesting their important role in spiritual practices. These cultural elements weren't just background details in Lagertha's story. They were the very fabric of her world. They influenced how she led, how she fought, and how she was remembered. The sagas tell us that she was not just respected for her fighting skills, but for her wisdom in understanding and upholding these cultural traditions. In many ways, the cultural and intellectual traditions of the Vikings were far ahead of their time. They created a society where strength was valued alongside wisdom, where stories preserved history as effectively as written records, and where the supernatural and practical existed side by side. Understanding these elements helps us appreciate not just Lagertha's story, but the rich complexity of Viking civilization as a whole. Let me tell you about how Lagertha's influence rippled through the complex web of Viking alliances and beyond, shaping not just Norse society, but the entire medieval world. The Viking Age wasn't just about isolated raids. It was an intricate dance of alliances, rivalries, and diplomatic relations. Lagertha mastered this political landscape with remarkable skill. The sagas tell us how she built alliances with other Viking clans through a combination of military prowess and shrewd diplomacy. Think of it as medieval networking, but with more axes and mead halls involved. What's fascinating is how these alliances worked. Archaeological evidence shows extensive trade networks between Viking settlements, with goods flowing between allied territories. Lagertha's position as a powerful earl meant she could control these vital trade routes. Recent discoveries of Viking trading posts have revealed just how sophisticated these networks were, with evidence of goods from as far as Constantinople and the Arab world. Her interactions with Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were particularly interesting. While popular history often portrays Vikings as mere raiders, the reality was far more complex. Yes, there were raids, but there was also trade, cultural exchange, and even political alliances. Some Anglo-Saxon chronicles mention female Viking leaders. While they don't name Lagertha specifically, they describe Norse women who led both armies and diplomatic missions. During Viking expeditions, Lagertha's influence on military tactics was revolutionary. The sagas describe how she combined traditional Viking aggressive warfare with clever strategic thinking. One of her most notable innovations was the use of Shieldmaidens in specific tactical formations. Archaeological evidence supports this. Weapons found in female warrior graves show signs of specialized combat techniques, suggesting organized military training. Here's something remarkable. Viking warfare wasn't just about brute force. Lagertha understood the psychological aspect of battle. She would often use her reputation to her advantage. Imagine the impact when word spread that a legendary Shieldmaiden was leading the opposing force. The sagas tell us that some enemies would retreat rather than face her in battle, but perhaps her most lasting influence was on Viking society itself. She showed that leadership wasn't about gender, it was about ability. Archaeological evidence from her time shows an increase in women holding positions of power in Norse settlements. We've found more female warrior graves, more women's names on runestones commemorating leaders, and more evidence of women controlling trade and politics. The impact of these relationships extended far beyond her lifetime. Her example inspired generations of Norse women to take up leadership roles. The sagas tell us that other Shieldmaidens followed in her footsteps, and recent archaeological discoveries continue to reveal evidence of powerful women in Viking society. What makes this particularly fascinating is how it challenges our modern assumptions about medieval society. Through Lagertha, we see that the Viking world was far more complex and nuanced than we often imagine. She didn't just participate in this intricate web of relationships. She helped reshape it, leaving a legacy that would influence Norse culture for centuries to come. These interactions and influences weren't just about power and politics, they were about showing what was possible. In a world where boundaries between cultures were being redrawn through both conflict and cooperation, Lagertha proved that true leadership transcends traditional boundaries and expectations. As we reach the final chapter of Lagertha's story, let's explore the lasting impact this remarkable Shieldmaiden left on history and how her legacy continues to resonate even today. Lagertha's influence on medieval women's roles was truly revolutionary. While most medieval societies restricted women to domestic roles, her story showed a different possibility. Archaeological evidence keeps revealing new insights into how Viking women held positions of power. We've found everything from weapons in female graves to runestones commemorating women leaders. These discoveries suggest that Lagertha wasn't just a legendary figure. She represented a real tradition of female leadership in Norse society. The way the Norse sagas portray Lagertha is fascinating. Unlike many medieval texts that often diminished women's achievements, the sagas present her as a fully realized character. Complex, powerful, and respected. What's particularly interesting is how her story survived through multiple retellings. From Saxo Grammaticus's 12th century account to modern interpretations, her core characteristics, strength, wisdom, and independence, remain consistent. Think about this. In an age when most historical records barely mentioned women, except in relation to men, here was a woman whose story was considered worth preserving in detail. The sagas describe not just her beauty or her relationships, but her tactical thinking, her leadership skills, and her political acumen. This comprehensive portrayal was rare for medieval literature and helps explain why her story has endured. Her inspiration for future generations can't be overstated. Throughout history, whenever societies debated women's capabilities as leaders and warriors, Lagertha's example stood as a powerful counter-argument. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to validate key elements of her story, showing that women in Viking society really did break traditional gender boundaries. When we look at contemporary female leaders, it's remarkable how many of Lagertha's qualities remain relevant. Her ability to balance strength with wisdom, to lead through both example and strategy, and to succeed in a male-dominated environment, these are challenges that modern leaders still face. The way she handled power, maintained alliances, and earned respect through capability rather than gender continues to resonate. The preservation of her story is itself a fascinating journey through history. The Norse oral tradition kept her tale alive for generations before it was written down. Then medieval chroniclers preserved it, though each added their own perspective. Modern archaeology has added new layers to our understanding, with discoveries constantly shedding new light on the world she inhabited. What makes Lagertha's legacy particularly powerful is how it challenges our assumptions about history. She shows us that the past was more complex and nuanced than we often imagine. In an era we usually picture as deeply restrictive for women, here was a female leader who commanded armies, ruled territories, and earned respect through her own achievements. Her story reminds us that history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about all those who dared to challenge the limitations of their time. Lagertha didn't just live within the constraints of her society. She helped reshape them, proving that courage, wisdom, and leadership know no gender. As we look to the future, Lagertha's legacy continues to grow. Each new archaeological discovery, each scholarly analysis, and each retelling of her story adds to our understanding of this remarkable woman and the world she helped shape. She remains a powerful symbol of what's possible when ability and opportunity meet, regardless of gender or social expectations. If you've been as fascinated by Lagertha's story as we have, you won't want to miss our upcoming episodes about other remarkable medieval figures. Make sure to like this video, share it with friends who love history, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives. Join us next time as we continue to explore the amazing stories that shaped our world. Remember, history isn't just about remembering the past. It's about understanding how remarkable individuals like Lagertha helped create the world we live in today. Their stories remind us that great change often starts with one person willing to challenge the boundaries of what's possible. See you in our next historical adventure.